The hospital clown. I'm a pediatric nurse, and I've seen things that don't leave you, even when you clock out and step into daylight. I'm not talking about ghosts or shadows in the hallways. I'm talking about the very human kind of horror. Parents crying into their hands, a child learning to be brave before they even learn multiplication. The beep of monitors becoming a lullaby. But I'm posting this because something happened on night shift that made me question whether human horror is the only category. My name is Sophie, 31 female, and I work in a children's hospital in the Western Netherlands. The building looks modern from the outside, with a lot of glass, clean lines, polished floors, and inside it's a maze of corridors that smell like disinfectant and warmed plastic, lit by ceiling panels that never quite stop humming. We have a policy about clowns. It's not written as "no clowns", obviously. It's phrased kindly. External performers must be registered, escorted, and limited to approved hours. We do get hospital clowns sometimes. These are trained professionals who work with kids and have the right clearances and the right schedules. They don't just wander around after visiting hours, and they definitely don't show up unannounced. That's why what I saw on Thursday night still feels like a splinter under my skin. It was raining in that stubborn, steady way that makes everything outside the windows look smeared. The kind of rain that turns streetlight into a blurry chaos. I remember because the parents in the waiting area kept checking their phones and were complaining about the weather, also about the parking that it was always too full, and about how everything felt harder when the sky was heavy. Around 1:20 a.m. I was doing my rounds in Ward C. This is the pediatric oncology. The hallway there is quieter than most, not because people are polite, but because everyone is listening for bad news. I checked vitals, adjusted drip, and I replaced a child's stuffed rabbit where that slipped to the floor. I was about to head back to the nurse's station when I heard laughter. But this was not a child's giggle or TV laughter. It was a low, breathy chuckle, like someone trying not to be heard. It came from the end of the hall near the playroom, which is closed at night and has its lights off, with toys neatly packed away behind glass. I paused. The laugh happened again. And then it stopped, very abruptly, like someone had noticed me listening. I told myself it was a parent awake, trying to calm their nerves, or a doctor with a weird sense of humor. Still, I walked towards the sound. The hallway seemed longer than usual, the overhead lights reflecting in the polished floor like a second corridor beneath my feet. My shoes made soft taps, and every tap sounded louder because the rest of the ward was sleeping. Near the playroom door, I saw movement in the corner of my vision. It was just a shift, a shadow sliding past the glass panel. I stepped closer and looked through. Inside the dark playroom, something pale moved again. Then the emergency light glowed faintly off a face. A white painted face. I couldn't see the full figure yet, just a face hovering in the dim, like it belonged to a mannequin propped up behind the toy shelves. Blue shapes were painted over the eyes, but not the usual cheerful diamonds. These were angled, sharp, like someone trying to make the eyes look longer and more alert. The mouth was painted in a neat arc, which had a smile too controlled to be comforting. The face turned slightly, and I realized it wasn't behind the shelves. It was standing in the middle of the room, just far enough back that the darkness swallowed the rest of the costume. I pushed the playroom door open hard enough that it banged against the wall. The light from the hall spilled in, and the room was empty. I stood there, the smell of plastic toys and faint dust filling my nose. My heart was thudding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I flicked on the playroom light. Everything looked normal. There were tiny chairs, a toy kitchen, bins of blocks, a mural painted in bright colors on the far wall. There was no clown. I couldn't see any footprints. There were no signs of anyone being there or have been. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew it the way you know you've put your hand on a hot stove, like your body remembers before your brain can rationalize it. I turned the light off, closed the door, and walked back to the station faster than I wanted to admit. At the nurse's station, Noor, my co-worker, was sipping coffee that smelled burnt and bitter, like hospital coffee always is. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said. "I saw someone," I answered. I didn't say clown, saying it felt childish, nor raise an eyebrow. "Security?" I nodded, even though I hadn't actually called. I didn't want to look paranoid. This job trains you to doubt yourself, to assume fatigue is responsible for everything. Still, I logged it. A simple note. Possible unauthorized person near playroom. No contact. Will monitor. Noor asked, "You sure it wasn't a parent?" "I'm sure," I said, and my voice sounded too thin. About half an hour later, the call bell rang from room C14. That room belonged to a boy named Bram. He is 8 years old, bald from the chemo, and always trying to make jokes, even when his lips were cracked. He liked magic tricks, and he was obsessed with card shuffling and would ask every staff member if they had a secret deck. I walked down the hall towards C14, passing the playroom again. The glass panel reflected my own face, pale under fluorescent light. When I reached C14, I heard Bram's mother whispering urgently. I pushed the door open. Bram was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide, both hands clutching his blanket as if it could anchor him. His mother looked at me, her face tight. "He says someone was in here." Bram pointed a shaking finger towards the corner near a closet. "He was right there," he whispered. "He said he had a trick." I forced my voice to stay calm. "Who, Bram?" His gaze darted to the hallway and then back to me. "The funny man," he said, "with the painted face." A cold heaviness settled in my stomach. "What did he do?" I asked. Bram swallowed hard. "He showed me a balloon," he whispered, "but it wasn't like balloons, it was like skin." His mother made a sound that was hard disbelief. His mother made a sound that was half disbelief and half panic. "He's been sleeping, so I think he might have just had a nightmare." Bram shook his head hard. "No, he touched the window and the rain stopped on the glass where his hand was." I looked at the window. It was raining outside, and the drops slid down in streaks. And in the middle of the glass, at about Bram's head height, there was a dry patch shaped like a handprint. Not a smear or a wipe. A perfect dry handprint, as if the rain had avoided that area. I stared at it, my mind trying to push the image away. Noor's coffee smell, the hum of the monitors, Bram's trembling breathing, everything felt too sharp. I turned back to Bram. What did he say? Bram's eyes glistened with tears. He said I was lucky, he whispered. He said the others didn't get to choose. I stepped into the room, checking the closet and checking under the bed, and I also checked the bathroom. There was nothing. No one. But the air felt disturbed, like a room after someone leaves in a hurry. I told Bram and his mother it was probably a misunderstanding. I told them I would alert security, and I lied, gently, because sometimes that's part of the job, placing your hand over the fear and telling it to stay quiet. After I left the room, I walked straight to the security phone and called. The security guard on duty, an older man named Hank, answered groggily. Unauthorized person, I said. Ward C, Children's Oncology, possibly in costume. Hank exhaled like he was annoyed. Probably a parent, I'll check. I waited at the nurse's station, with my arms folded, watching the hallway, like a hawk. 15 minutes later, Hank arrived. Rainwater was still on his jacket collar, as if he'd literally just come in from the outside. He walked the hall, he checked all the doors, and glanced into every room. He came back and shrugged. No one, he said. Maybe you're tired, Sophie. I wanted to scream at him that Bram saw it too, but Bram was a sick child, and in adult logic that makes his testimony easier to dismiss. Hank added, We haven't had any registered clowns this week. Then who was it? I asked. Hank didn't answer. He just gave me a look like I was asking him to solve the weather. I finished my shift with my nerves stretched tight. Every shadow felt suspicious. Every distant sound made me look up. At 6:45, as the sky began to lighten into a dull grey, I walked past the playroom one last time. The door was closed, but taped to the glass panel was something that hadn't been there all night. A laminated visitor badge. A blank white card with no name, no barcode. There was just one word written in neat, careful handwriting. Bram. My stomach sank. I stared at the badge until my eyes burned, then ripped it off the glass and brought it to the station. Noor frowned. What is that? I don't know, I said, and my hands were shaking now, openly. Noor looked down the corridor, towards Bram's room. Maybe his mom did that? A joke? It's laminated, I said. Where would she get a laminator at 6 a.m.? Noor didn't answer. We heard a scream then. Sharp, raw, the kind that doesn't come from nightmares. And it came from room C14. I ran, and when I pushed the door open, Bram's mother was standing by the bed, hands over her mouth and eyes wide in horror. Bram was sitting up, frozen, staring at his blanket. On top of it lay a small balloon, grey and glossy and wet. It was tied neatly in a knot, and on the balloon, drawn in black marker, was a smile. Not a happy one. A grin stretched too wide, as if whoever drew it had been thinking about teeth. Bram looked up at me and whispered, with his voice cracking, "He says it's time for the last trick." And from somewhere in the hallway behind me, very soft, almost swallowed by the morning hum of the hospital, I heard that low chuckle again. The Schoolyard Clown. I'm a janitor at a primary school. That sentence doesn't usually lead to horror stories, but I've learned that quiet buildings at night have their own personality. They breathe differently, they sound differently, and they make you feel like your footsteps are too loud. It's like you're disturbing something that's been waiting. My name is Jeroen, 42 male, and I've worked at the Wilgenhof School for almost 9 years. It's one of those friendly-looking brick buildings with big windows and colorful paper art taped everywhere. During the day, it's chaos. Kids are running, teachers are shouting over noise, and the smell of glue sticks and wet coats is everywhere. At night, it's my world. I clean, I lock up, I do small repairs, I move the chairs, reset the building for the next day. I like the routine and I like the peace. But last week, in the middle of a rainstorm, I saw something in the schoolyard that has made me consider quitting. It started with a simple thing. The swing. We have a small playground outside the main entrance. There are 2 swings, a slide, a climbing frame, and a little rubber path around it that teachers use for games. At night, the playground is locked behind a low fence. The school cameras cover it because teenagers sometimes hop in and break things. On Monday night, rain came down hard enough to drum on the windows. Wind pushed it sideways, and the courtyard lights cast a weak glow that made the wet ground shine like oil. I was inside mopping the hallway near the front office when I heard a sound through the glass doors. A creak. Not the building settling, and it was surely not a pipe. It was a creak that was coming from the playground. I stopped mopping and listened. Creak, creak, like a swing moving. I walked to the glass doors and looked out into the yard. At first I saw nothing. The rain blurred everything, and the light reflected off the wet ground. Then the swing moved into view. Just the edge of the seat was swinging forward, but it wasn't empty. Someone was sitting on it. A figure hunched slightly, letting the swing move in slow arcs. Their shoes skimmed the wet rubber and made the soft squeak that I'd heard. I squinted, trying to identify the person. No teenagers would be sitting calmly in a storm. No drunk would be that steady. Then lightning flashed, brief, bright, and in that instant the figure's face snapped into clarity. It was a clown. It wasn't a cheerful balloon animal type. This one wore a dark jacket with a bright trim that looked almost theatrical. The collar flared around the neck like a ruffle. The face was painted stark. It had a pale base, had black around the eyes like someone had smudged charcoal, and a thin mouth painted in a tight line. Not a smile. A cap sat low on the head, and rain slid off it in beads. He swung slowly, looking straight ahead, as if he were thinking. My stomach tightened. My first thought was it had to be a prank. Maybe it's just some older kid in costume. Then the clown turned his head and looked directly at the doors, at me. I felt my body go cold, like the rain had found its way inside. I stepped back automatically, and the mop handle slipped in my grip. The clown stopped swinging, and the chains creaked once more as the seat settled. Then the clown stood up. He walked towards the fence, calm, measured, and not hurried by the rain at all. His shoes made no splashes. That detail bothered me more than it should have. He should have been stomping through puddles at this point. It has been raining so much. He stopped at the fence and lifted one gloved hand, pressing it against the metal. He didn't try to climb, luckily. He just stood there, staring at me through glass and rain. I locked the front doors even though they were already locked. Then I did something stupid. I went to the security monitor in the office. I pulled up the camera feed of the playground. The screen showed the yard, the swings, the slides, the whole playground. It was empty. I didn't see a clown, and there was no movement. But I could see him with my own eyes through the door. I turned from the monitor back to the door and my breath caught. The clown was closer now. He wasn't at the fence anymore. He was standing right near the doors, close enough that I could see rain droplets clinging to the paint on his cheeks. He raised his hand and tapped the glass. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound was soft but precise. Then he pointed down. I followed his finger. On the ground outside the door, something lay in the rain. A small bright object. A child's shoe. One of the tiny gym shoes kids leave behind all the time. But this one looked clean. Like it had been placed. It was super fresh. The clown tilted his head slightly, waiting. I don't know why, but I opened the intercom. My voice sounded rough. "Who are you?" The clown's mouth moved, but he didn't speak into the glass. Instead, he leaned closer until his painted lips almost touched it, and whispered. So faint, I couldn't hear it through the barrier. I shook my head. He smiled then, not with paint, but with something underneath. A tiny shift that made the painted mouth look like a mask sliding. He lifted his finger and wrote on the fogged glass with it, tracing letters slowly. Jeroen. My name. My stomach flipped. No one outside my workplace used my name here. Teachers call me Mr. Kids call me janitor, and the principal called me when something broke. But he also didn't really know my name. The clown watched my reaction as if it was a lesson. Then he wrote another word beneath my name. Help. I stared. Help, I mouthed. He nodded once, very small, like he was trying to be subtle. Then he pointed towards the playground again, towards the climbing frame. Lightning flashed, and for an instant I saw something there I hadn't seen before. A shape under the climbing frame. It was small, like a child crouching. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might choke. I leaned forward to see better, but rain distorted everything. The clown's gloved hand pressed against the glass. He pointed again, insistently. I ran to the side door that leads to the yard. That door opens into a short covered walkway. I grabbed my keys, my flashlight, and because fear makes you irrational, I grabbed the metal broom handle like it was a weapon. I unlocked the side door and stepped out into the covered walkway. Rain hammered the roof above me. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold concrete. I shined my flashlight towards the playground. The swing moved slightly in the wind. But I didn't see a clown, and I didn't see a child. I walked towards the climbing frame, the light beam jittering because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The rubber ground soaked under my shoes, and my breath came out in clouds. As I got closer, I noticed something at the base of the climbing frame. A line of small wet footprints, bare footprints, leading into darkness beneath the structure. I crouched and shined my light under. I saw nothing. It was just shadow and wet rubber. I stood up and my heart was racing. I turned slowly and scanned the yard. That's when I saw him again. He wasn't by the doors anymore. He was at the far end of the playground, standing behind the slide, watching me, and his eyes were glowing. And next to him, half hidden behind the slide, was a small shape. A child. I couldn't see their face. I could only see the outline of a hooded jacket, small shoulders hunched, and standing unnaturally still. I took a step forward. "Hey!" I called. "Are you okay?" The child didn't move. The clown lifted a hand slowly as if to wave, and then he placed that hand on the child's shoulder. The child's head tilted up slightly, like a puppet responding to a string. The clown leaned down and whispered into the child's ear. The child turned and looked at me. Even from that distance I could see the face. It was painted white, not makeup smudged, not face paint from a party, a full clown face, complete with darkened eyes and a mouth line. The child lifted a hand and waved at me, slow and stiff. My stomach dropped. I staggered back instinctively. The clown straightened, then reached behind the slide and pulled something into view. A rope. It was a rope. He held it loosely, like it was casual. Then he pointed towards the fence gate, the one that opens onto the street, like he wanted me to leave, or follow. I backed toward the covered walkway, keeping my flashlight trained on them. The clown didn't chase. He didn't hurry. He just watched me, and as I retreated, the child turned away from me and walked with the clown towards the gate, step by step through the rain. The gate was locked from my side. I ran towards it anyway, keys fumbling, but by the time I reached it, the clown and the child were already on the other side, standing out on the street, in the rain, under the streetlight. The child looked back once more, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. I recognized the jacket. It belonged to a boy who had been absent from school all day, a boy whose name had been on the missing lunchbox notice board in the staff room. The clown raised one finger and pressed it to his hips, and pressed it to his lips in a shh. Then he pointed down the street where a car idled with its headlights off. The back door opened and a child stepped in with the clown.